So, for the next 2 days, we're going to be talking about what I think it's a really cool subject, and it's something known as the resistance movement. And there were actually a lot of these, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. But basically, resistance. That means that you're going to, this is the definition, the refusal to accept or comply with something, the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. And the thing about the resistance movement under the Nazi era is that it was extremely, extremely dangerous. Hitler had a massive, massive organization dedicated to just sniffing out, finding, and severely, severely punishing any type of form of resistance. And when I say any type of form of resistance, I mean any kind of form of resistance. I'm not just talking about armed soldiers with guns trying to have little makeshift man-made militias trying to take down Hitler. I'm talking about a resistance of maybe even just being in a cafe and saying that you disagreed with one of Hitler's policies, or you thought a decision he made in the war maybe wasn't that great, okay? That would be considered resistance. Writing something that would go... Good job, honey. Okay, go ahead. Writing something that would go against Nazi ideas would be resistance, because when you're brainwashing somebody, okay, it's like a coordinated dance with a whole bunch of other people, and one misstep will be noticed. One thing out of place can make the dance fall apart, and that's the idea of resistance when you have a dictatorship, when they are trying to brainwash. You start to get some other type of ideas out there, and it can threaten the entire system. So the way I think about it is this. Let's say your whole life they tell you that this guy... Austin, don't throw that. They tell you that the sky or the sun's red, okay? Sun's red, the sun's red, the sun's red. You've learned about it your whole life. Everybody agrees the sun's red. So let's say all of a sudden they start saying, some people start to say, no, the sun's yellow. And at first you kind of think they're crazy, right? Like they're crazy, they're stupid. That's really dangerous thinking. Of course the sky's red or the sun's red. But then just that idea, right, is going to stick with you, and you're not going to forget it. And maybe you start thinking about it a little bit more, and maybe you start looking into it, and maybe you start researching it, and maybe all of a sudden then one other person starts to realize that, no, the sun isn't red, it is yellow, and so forth and so forth. And that's the idea of a resistance. You can't have any resistance or the whole thing can fall apart. And so, like I said, the Nazis are very, very good at sniffing these people out. They have secret police, they have spies, they have people spying on the secret police, okay? Just massive organizations dedicated to this. And everybody knew that. Everybody knew that. They made this very, very public. And so the idea that one person, let alone many people, would have the guts, right, would have the courage to resist no matter how big or how small is really, really quite remarkable. Because if you were found, they weren't going to kill you in an awful, terrible way. They weren't just going to kill you. They could potentially kill or torture your entire family. And so, again, the courage, here, I'll take that away. The courage that would have taken is epic. Okay, so the resistance movement. Where was the resistance movement? Literally, guys, the resistance movement was everywhere. Everywhere. No matter what country Hitler took over, there was a resistance movement that popped up. An acknowledgement to all the bravery around the world. Even though you were, in some cases, in an occupied country, and there were Nazis everywhere, and there were spies everywhere, and people were turning other people in just so they wouldn't get in trouble or to make it look like they were loyal to the movement, yet you still had these resistance movements. Like I said, they're everywhere, whether you're in Belgium, the Dutch, it doesn't matter. But some of the really big resistance movement, the two that come to my mind are the Polish and then the French, two really big resistance movements. Remember, the Polish, that's where this all started, right? World War II gets declared because Hitler invades Poland, and they try to fight. They do try to fight. And so from the start, you have this first, the Polish fighting back against the invasion, then the Polish resistance. And at the end, the Polish resistance ended up getting up to 400,000 people. And these are 400,000 people living in the woods, okay, for the duration of the war, and all those elements. So not only are they fighting, the cold and the snow and the rain, but they're also fighting the Nazis at the exact same time. And then the French, guys, the French is also going to be a really, really big movement. There were so many people that were not only disgusted, obviously, with the Nazi rule, but they were also disgusted that so many French officials complied with the Nazi rule. Remember, France gets split into two, and we have Vichy France, right? Vichy France was a puppet government, and they were so angry, and they were so disgusted that they literally took up arms and said, forget this, we're going to fight them. And their contributions to us are absolutely huge, and I'll get into that a little bit more. There was a big Jewish resistance, but believe it or not, and this one really impresses me, the German resistance. There were tons of German people that were disgusted with what Hitler was doing, hated what Hitler stood for, and actively tried to fight against them. Now, were there a lot of people in Germany that didn't agree with Hitler but just kept their nose down and their head down? Absolutely. I mean, these people had lives, they had families, they had children. But a lot of those people, even though they also had lives, families, and children, they actively tried to fight in any way they could against Germany. And you're in the lion's den. Think about that. If you think the mind control, where is that going to be? Where are they going to put the most effort in mind control? Okay? And submission. And basically loving Hitler culture. That's going to be obviously in Germany, because you need to keep that stronghold to keep what's going on, because people naturally want freedoms. And so you have to basically convince them. Good job, honey. Okay. Yes, just give me a minute. Okay. You have to. I don't even know what I was going to say. I literally just lost my whole train of thought because of Austin. Okay. So anyway, lots of resistance movements, no matter where you go. Now, some of these, who makes these up? People literally from all walks of life are going to make up the resistance movement. It didn't necessarily, a lot of times when we think of resistance, we think of armed men. Absolutely not. That's not always the case. And obviously those armed men took the resistance movement a long way, but in some cases they couldn't do what other people could do. So there were young people, there were old people. A lot of the resistance movement is made up by women, a lot. Parents, children, everybody. Young people, that is something that's so, so cool, and I'll get to that in a second. But just because, like we said, the Polish movement made up 400,000 people. Not every resistance movement was this huge network of people that were backing each other up with arms, right? Some of the resistance was just individual people. Some of it was just maybe a husband and wife trying to do their part to make sure that this isn't what history looked like. And I often think to myself, what would be scarier? Doing it with a group of people and knowing that you could be betrayed, knowing that somebody could infiltrate your group easier, but at least you would have somebody to back you up. You would have camaraderie, right? You would have friendship. You would have support. You would have help. Or would it be totally going alone? Which one would be more difficult? Going it alone, you have no support. You have no help. You have no backup. You have nobody to commiserate with or jump back and forth with. I just don't know. But again, a lot of these were actually done by younger people. And sometimes it was easier for younger people to start this because they didn't have families and they didn't have children. And in many examples in history, younger people are sometimes braver than people, not old people, but even middle-aged people and older people, because they have less to lose. So any really great movement in history, if you take a look at it, almost always there's the youth is behind that movement. And this is exactly true in the resistance movements throughout all of Europe. A lot of them were in high school. A lot of them were your age. So what did they do? Okay. One, obviously they're going to fight. Okay. Now, I say 400,000 Polish people, and obviously that's a lot, but that is nothing compared to the Nazi war machine. I mean, you're talking about a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, but it doesn't matter. They were still there, and they still took up arms, and they still fought bravely. But the resistance movement, I would venture to guess, had a greater impact in this stuff down here. One of the things that they were really good at was interrupting supply lines. And so like literally like messing up like trains and train tracks and like even like simple things like changing street signs, okay? To stop things from getting to where they need to be. Because you can have all the people in the world, but if they don't have weapons, how do they fight? If they don't have food, how do they fight? Another one, spying. Especially within Germany, spying was a big thing. Misinformation, disinformation, excuse me. The idea of providing them with wrong information, spreading information. Again, that I was watching that movie on Netflix, and the whole point of the movie, there is a couple that is literally just writing their thoughts about Hitler down on paper and spreading it throughout spreading it throughout Berlin. Okay, just here's some leaflets, and we're just gonna talk. And there's a lot of different examples of that, and again, putting that information into people's minds. Radios. Hitler had banned certain radio broadcasts, but you can't really stop people from listening to radio stations in their own home, because you could pick up radio signals. By the end of this, there was over 100 different radio stations that were all anti-Nazi, anti-Hitler, just providing information. And the one that I think is really cool is the humanitarian resistance. It's not always just about fighting the enemy, it's about helping the people too. And there was a really big humanitarian effort trying to help people who were considered undesirables. If you think, hold on for a second, if you think about the whole story of Anne Frank, the people that helped Anne and her family, that was part of the resistance movement. I remember hearing a story about there was 2 houses in Germany, and at the end of the war, the neighbors came out, they were talking, and the one guy says, "I know you were hiding people in your attic." And the guy was like, "How'd you know that?" And he says, "There was never snow on your roof." Okay, because the body heat of the people in the attic, right, stopped snow from, basically it was melting snow. And so there's all these little stories about like people helping other people, and that's still considered resistance.